Hey, did you clean your room? We're gonna get right into this Jordan Peterson best comeback compilation. First, please go down and click like and subscribe, and I'm gonna press play right now.
I thought we were talking about masculinity.
We are.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
How are we talking about masculinity?
Because I'm asking you what you think of men and of women.
No, basically what you've been trying to do, I would say for the last 15 minutes, is put me into a sequence of corners by accusing me of various forms of misbehavior.
The Ministry of Women's Affairs in New Zealand and the Minister of Women's Affairs, or the Minister for Women as she's known, suggested recently that there were too many white old men on boards in New Zealand of private and public companies, and just suggested that they needed to move aside so there could be more diversity. Your response to that suggestion?
Well, what's her racial and ethnic background, just out of curiosity?
I think she's born in America, Julianne Genter. She's a member of our Green Party here.
Is she white?
Yes.
Well, maybe it's time for her to bloody well move aside and let someone who isn't white have her position.
Oh, look at him. Are they spraying something?
That's pure narcissism at work, by the way.
Lol. What are they spraying? Okay.
You know, to hijack an event like this that other people put time and effort into, and to use their civility of the crowd and the civility of the organizers as an excuse to blatantly yell out your ill-informed opinions is no way to conduct a civil dialogue. It's absolutely appalling. The people who do that should be embarrassed.
Do you think a trans woman is a real woman?
Here we go.
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. You know, I don't know what that means. What do you mean, a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, you know, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant.
Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
So that's interesting. I think the biological markers are relevant. What do you guys think?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation.
So that's interesting. So the question the reporter asked there was, would you use alternate pronouns hypothetically, which is a very broad statement. He's saying no, he wouldn't if it's backed by punitive legislation. I think the big thing here is, like, sometimes Jordan Peterson actually did answer saying no, he wouldn't use the like a pronoun if someone demanded or asked him to. I forget what the phrasing is. He said no to that question. He has, if we're being honest. But usually he emphasizes the fact that if it's compelled, then he would refuse to do it. He doesn't want it to be legislated and required. Now, I think that kind of indicates, like there he hesitated to answer the question. He kind of dodged it a bit. He said he made his position clear. Why not just answer it again, right? I think that might just be genuine, like, not being sure. Because it's kind of like, well, you know, he's not a disrespectful person. He's an agreeable person. He doesn't want to disrespect people or be unnecessarily provocative. And if someone has a preference, then you know, I doubt he would want to flagrantly disrespect their request, right? At the same time, if it's part of this movement, if it's part of this ideology that's trying to, like, seep its way into society, then he might even be opposed to it in a personal setting, one-on-one with someone, when it isn't even legislated. I think that might be the debate going on there in his mind, and he wasn't clear on that. I don't know if he was as clear on that as he could have been, and that's why some people are like, oh, is he against trans use of pronouns for trans people, or alternate pronouns in general, which is a different thing. Or is he just, against the legislation? That's kind of iffy there.
And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
In the video, you said that the problem with those angry women is that since at the end of the argument you cannot fight physically, you can't really deal with them.
That's not what I said. I said that that's one of the things that keeps conversation between men civil. Women can't argue with angry women. Women are often bullied by angry women.
What I meant was more, you said that, and I'm really not trying to paraphrase you or, to put words into your mouth.
You are trying that.
No, it is things that you said, that you cannot deal with those
yes, but don't tell me that you're not trying to put words into my mouth because you've selected what you're going to ask, and you selected it very carefully with a tremendous amount of forethought.
Well,
and there's a purpose for that. What is the purpose precisely?
I am quoting things that you said.
Why? What is it that you're trying to establish?
Because you said that.
I thought we were talking about masculinity.
We are.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
Again.
How are we talking about masculinity?
Because I'm asking you what you think of men and of women.
Basically what you've been trying to do, I would say, for the last 15 minutes is put me into a sequence of corners by accusing me of various forms of misbehavior. So why are we doing that? What's the point here?
These are things that you said. My job as a
question.
journalist is to ask questions about what you represent and the ideas that you defend.
Your job is also to select the things that you might ask about in some manner that doesn't indicate a substantive bias. You picked 3 things to talk to me about in the last 20 minutes that were very carefully selected. Why did you pick those things?
Because this is my job.
No, not necessarily. You could be asking me, for example, why I've spoken to 250,000 people live in the last 8 months. That might be more newsworthy.
Well, we're not going to have a big debate about journalism, but if a journalist doesn't ask the tough questions, how can you give the good answers?
Well, it depends on what the tough questions are. It depends on
I didn't think that they would be tough. We're talking about things that you said. I mean, if it's easier to have conversation between men, because there is this underlying threat, of a physical contact.
I don't think it's easier. It tends to be somewhat more civil.
Question for Professor Peterson.
The guy didn't
Why
understand it
do you
at
feel
all.
that someone's personal gender identity and pronouns infringes your free speech?
Did you catch that sigh he just made there? He doesn't enjoy this. He doesn't enjoy this. If you saw the most recent post, the full interview of him with the Post Times or the Times or something like that, the article that was horribly worded given the tone of their interview, he said he doesn't like this stuff. He doesn't like these interviews. They take a huge toll on him emotionally. So let's keep going.
One not also argue, based on your interpretation, that professors can use racial slurs in their classroom and that the inability to do so would violate their freedom of speech?
There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
As you might imagine, you've been a topic of conversation on this campus a lot in the past week or so, certainly among a lot of us who discuss politics. And one of the things that sort of united people who like and dislike a lot of your ideas is that we appreciate your defense of free speech, and we appreciate you coming here to talk about it with us. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is Professor Van Dyke addressed the distinction between you and Jonathan Haidt. And you mentioned this as sort of a temperamental one. And I think, I'm sure that's true to some extent, but I noticed you've made a lot of more sort of substantively inflammatory claims. Like in the course of this lecture, you called the authors of Facebook posts demons and totalitarians. In past events, you've called them things like neo-Marxists, cultural Marxists. You've called them, I believe, a fifth column that is committing treason against the West. And it seems to me this is more than temperamental. This is a substantive difference. And
it's a substantive difference,
and,
yes.
And another thing you've done is that, unlike Haidt, you have a more sort of comprehensive political program. You've talked a lot in defense of traditional hierarchies, both of gender, of class, so on, though emphatically not of race.
Class.
And so it seems that...
I haven't talked about defense of traditional hierarchies in terms of gender and class. That's not true.
Well, you've talked about hierarchies in society. You've talked
Yeah,
about...
that's true. I have
Well,
done
would you
that.
not define
But I
that as
haven't
class?
justified them on the basis of gender and class.
You
Whatever,
well,
the
okay,
two
but
categories.
you talk
Not
about,
okay. That's an important distinction.
Okay, but you defend hierarchies in society in a way that... You talk a lot about the Pareto distribution, yes?
That doesn't mean I
Yeah.
defend it.
Well, okay,
No, not well,
yes.
okay.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think you talk a lot...
Observing that something exists is
Yes.
not the same as defending it. How in the world...
Well, people attack it, right?
What's that?
And you don't. People attack it.
Attack
as inherently, attack the hierarchies of society as inherently unjust, right?
Well, they're unjust, but
Yes.
they're also useful.
Okay, so you say they're useful. Some
Well,
people would disagree
look at
with
it
that
this way.
proposition.
Okay, look at it this way. You obviously think that it's worthwhile to stand up and ask a question.
Yes.
So you think that standing up and asking a question is better than
Yes.
not standing up and asking a question.
Yes.
Okay, that's a hierarchy
Yes.
of values.
Yes.
Okay, without the hierarchy of values, you couldn't act.
Of course.
No, not of course.
Well, wait.
It's
do you-
partly why
I
I'm
think
defending
there's
the
a distinction here.
hierarchy. Without
no
a hierarchy,
one disagrees
there's
about
no
the
impetus
facts
to
of
act.
the hierarchy, right?
What's that?
There is a hierarchy in society, right?
No, there's multiple hierarchies
Okay, there are
in
multiple
society.
hierarchies in society, right?
Yes.
And you say that they are based in, you invoke the lobster, right? That they are based in nature.
I
Yes.
said that they were inevitable.
Yes, that they were inevitable.
Invoke the lobster. Let's go.
Some
Right,
people
that
disagree
doesn't
with
mean
that.
that they're
but,
good.
But my point is that this is generally relevant to it. You have a broader point than free speech. This is one of the things you talk about. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas I think there are some other activists who focus on more exclusively.
I'm not
on
an
free speech.
activist. Marxists say, well, that wasn't real Marxism. What it really means, and I've thought about this for a long time, it's the most arrogant possible statement anyone could ever make. It means, if I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia instead of the genocidal massacres, because I understand the doctrine of Marxism and everything about me is good. It's like, well, think again, sunshine. You don't understand it. You don't understand it. And you're not that good. And if the power was in your hands, assuming you had the competence, which you don't, you wouldn't have done any better. And even if you had, there would have been someone else waiting right behind you to shoot you the first time you actually tried to do anything good. And that's what happened to all the old guard who ran the damn revolution. Stalin rounded them all up and shot them, along with their families and millions of other people. So even if you do happen to be that avatar of moral purity that you claim implicitly, the probability that you'd get to act out your goodness in relationship to those possessed by your ideology is zero. I would say that anybody with more than a cursory knowledge of 20th century history who dares to claim simultaneously that they have compassion for the downtrodden and that they're Marxists are revealing either an ignorance of history that's so astounding that it's actually a form of miracle, or a kind of or a kind of malevolence that's so reprehensible that it's almost unspeakable. Because we already ran the equity experiment over the course of the 20th century, and we already know what the Marxist doctrines have done for oppressed people all around the world, and the answer to that mostly was imprison them, enslave them, work them to death, or execute them. And as far as I can tell, that's not precisely commensurate with any message of compassion. Sorry, tried that, didn't work. We got 100 million corpses to prove it. And that.
By the way, do you notice the edits? You got to watch the edits. You got to catch that, because some people edit these things and it's done maliciously. Here it's done for entertainment purposes, but you got to be careful. See how it's cutting quick? You got to be mindful of that.
That's plenty for me, and if it's not enough for you, well then you should do some serious thinking either about your historical knowledge or about your moral character.
We talk about, feminizing men. It almost sounds derogatory. It's almost as if you're saying that to be feminine or to express any sort of femininity is actually inferior to masculinity. And I think that is a huge problem even within the language that we use. When you say, don't be such a girl, don't be such a pussy, the greatest insults that men can give each other tend to have feminine origins, like, as I said, pussy or faggot or anything like that. And I think again that speaks to a very systematic inequality between the genders. And
you attributed the rates of mental illness among men to their inability to express, say, sentimental emotions. And I don't think there's a shred of clinical evidence to support that stance.
Sorry.
No.
No.
Well, I don't think there's a shred of evidence to support that stance. The kind of violence, for example, that Lawrence is discussing is a consequence of competitive violence among young men as they move
I think there
towards-
is some evidence that men find it difficult to talk about things, and that
and they also
ways
find it
in which
hard
you can
to
help
reach
young
out.
men to talk about things.
And that's the evidence for the differential rates of mental health
And
suffering? I don't think so.
I also don't think when you're talking about things being so innate, Judith Butler would have said that, gender is a construct, that gender is a performance.
Well, Judith Butler doesn't know what she's talking about in the least, so I don't.
That's interesting, but
She's no
agree
scientist.
with
She
her.
doesn't know the
Well, then if you look
psychological
at someone
literature.
like Cordelia.
All right, thank you everyone. That's Jordan Peterson, Best Comebacks compilation. Please click like and subscribe below, and I'm coming back with more just for you. Thank you very much.